Well, good morning. I am Chris from Airwindows, and we are doing another coding stream. And today we're going to code YNotch. And I'll answer lots of questions if anybody shows up to ask them, because I am set up to be able to see the chat questions more easily. So let's see how we can arrange this. Don't mind me, I've always got to shuffle windows when I'm doing this. And we'll try that this time. Hey, Jess. I'm going to have a peek and see if I have, yep. Messages. Oh boy, but I have lots of things going on at the moment. How am I doing today? Oh, pretty good, I suppose. How's my levels? Am I about the right volume and all? I am still adapting to, there's my levels, there we go. Okay, so if I do this, then I can set my levels in such a way that I can see what I'm doing. I am busily moving on towards getting into the Z series plugins. That's those plugins that are meant to emulate EmuZ filters. And we're going to start going after those pretty soon. And I've also had a bunch of suggestions, such as, can you do a soft clip that works like AD clip? And of course, somebody asking about that kind of prompted an idea, and I was like, come to think of it, I suppose I can think of a way of doing that. And I've been involved in a whole bunch of interesting arguments on Gearspace forums about dither and things. I have a new concept, which I think I may have talked about last week or not. And that, oh goodness, hey Dan, thank you so much. That's very sweet. People don't usually do that. Cool. Let me look up my notes. So, the idea that I had around the dither conversation was that I think I figured out how to do a test that documents the lower threshold of perception. And this is something that is, there's been much contention about this for, oh boy, decades or more. Because the deal is, people normally test things by using double-blind tests, which are very insensitive, and so they will only show you a thing if you can establish it, that you hear the thing, and that you never don't hear the thing. And that's what ABX tests are for. They're for absolutely nailing something down so that there is no possible argument that you don't hear the thing every single time. So if you ever claim like, oh shucks, MP3s sound terrible, I can pick it out every time, I can't stand those things, there's a way of telling that. You can do the ABX test and go through that process and document that in fact you're able to pick out the one that's the MP3 100% of the time without fail. That's not the only interesting threshold. In fact, that's a relatively uninteresting threshold. Anybody working with music, mastering, or anything along those lines pretty much needs to be able to function at a more subtle level than that. Because if you can only make decisions about things that you hear absolutely every time, and that a normal person would hear absolutely every time, then there's nothing that you can do that a person walking in off the street couldn't also do. It removes the ability to fine-tune stuff beyond the discretion of your average random Joe off the street. And though one might argue like, well, there's no such thing as discretion beyond the average Joe off the street, it's all completely arbitrary, you do find that there are people who make judgment calls on things, like they're mixing or they're mastering or whatever, and the stuff that they do just sells to more people. It communicates better. And in some ways, I think this is because of coming up with balances, adjustments that are on a finer level of discretion than that. For instance, if you have a drum kit or whatever, and there's a particular adjustment of the microphones that locks in a sound that's clear and communicates, and you can set the microphones forward or backwards or space them in time, and there's one exact position that's exactly locked in to produce a particular result. An average person off the street might be able to get within 5% of that. If somebody exists who is able to get within 1% or 0.01% or 0.00001% of that perfect focus, my contention is that people listening, just regular people, will 9 times out of 10 hear the most obvious stuff, but they will get glimpses of the finer resolution, just not on a consistent basis. Glimpses that are too fugitive to really do much with. But if you set the thing up, if you adjust it just right, or if you do the correct thing on a much finer granularity, the glimpses people get just as the routine of listening to something will all be positive, will all communicate correctly. And that's how you get pieces of music where you put it on and instantly it's like, oh yeah, oh that's good. You immediately recognize, here's something that is worth hearing. And adjusting something like this requires being able to work at this level of granularity that's much finer than you can pick out every single time. So the note that I made was like this. I was calling it occasional B threshold, which is not like occasional wasp threshold. No. This is the letter B. And I'm imagining a situation where you have a computer program that's generating this string, this sea of letters, and they're random. They could include symbols and things as well, but they are random letters. And the idea is that you've got a knob, and there's a position on this knob where a particular spot on the knob is 0, and to either side of it, it's a higher number than that. And that sets the frequency at which the letter B appears in this string of letters. Now, if the string is going very, very slowly, you can count each letter as they appear. And then you will see, oh, there is a B, and then you will try to adjust the knob to the position, which could be anywhere on the knob, that minimizes the appearance of the letter B. However, if it starts spitting out letters way faster than you can possibly read, that's where things get interesting, because you're not seeing all the letters, not even close. But what you're doing is trying to get a sense of, did a B appear in there somewhere? Or was it a D? Was it something else? Was it an L followed by an O? A lot of ambiguity, and that's the point. So the idea is, if the program is spitting out mass quantities of letters, and you got this knob, it's randomized, so each time it's going to pick a different position on the knob that you have to focus in on. And to either side of that position, you'll have a larger proportion of the letter B appearing in the string. You're going to find the place where there's literally 0. People who are able to refine their perceptions where they're picking information out of the noise floor will be able to get a sense of whether B appeared somewhere, but they won't be able to tell you exactly where. It might have been on the screen for just an instant. It doesn't really matter whether the letters are going by faster than the refresh rate of the monitor even allows. Like if it generates a B and then it scrolls off the screen before it is actually displayed, that doesn't really matter very much. What matters is how often that letter is appearing in the stream, and can you continue to adjust the control so that the letter is appearing as little as possible. Because if you overshoot, you start increasing the number again. People should be able to adjust this so they're able to find that spot, and they're able to focus in on the exact place where they think it's like, okay, that's 0. I've got it to 0. I can't turn it in either direction without slightly increasing the number. Therefore, that's my guess as the minimal setting. And some people will be better than others at adjusting this in such a way where they've literally got themselves to 0. Now, what I finished with talking about this stuff as I posted on it was when people get haughty and insist that they can hear B every time, what they really mean is that over time they'll be able to optimize an adjustment like this. So people say, I can hear 24-bit dither every time. What they mean is if they keep listening all day, they'll eventually pick up on the distinction between whether it's there or not. And they've heard both, and over time they will strongly prefer having dither be there rather than not having it be there, even though the amplitude of the phenomenon is very, very faint indeed. The idea is that over time they will eventually get glimpses into this noise floor and be able to hear whether something is correct or not. And that is a very, very different thing from an ABX test, because the claim is not, I can hear every time, I never fail to hear when this is wrong. The concern is, can you continue optimizing? Can you continue adjusting and make something better, even if you're not picking it out every time? And this is relevant in mixing, and this is relevant in things like dither at 24-bit and so on, where what you're doing is trying to tune something in so that it will sound its best, and it's at too subtle of a, it's going to be too subtle to pick out literally every time. Jazz says, denorm works best when it's properly adjusted for different processes. Actually, come to think of it, I usually let you guys be a chat on stream. I should do that. I had forgotten that that was a thing. Just a minute. I will bring your screen up. Yeah, join me. All right, but the bit that I will see is here. Alrighty, and hi do. So yeah, I've had many things on my mind lately. More will be revealed as far as that's concerned. And one of them is that I have just about finished up the album mixing project that I'm doing, which is quite interesting. It's a band that I've worked with before, and the whole point of the exercise was taking something that was a very human performance and conveying it in such a way where the personality reaches out and commands attention and disrupts the tendency to try to find perfection and accuracy in all things. So it's like the anti-modern music. And the funny thing is, I was listening to other music this morning, I was watching a documentary on Porcupine Tree, the Steven Wilson band. And the really curious thing that I found about that was that their music sounded and vibed about the same over 360p, extremely bad compressed, YouTube audio as it does normally. Like, the music of that band, in my experience, conveys the same emotions and experiences in extremely degraded form as it does when you go all high res on it. And that's very weird. But I think it's akin to what Steven Wilson tends to do with remixes and things, which is very much modernize them. One of the things that showed up is they started recording this album that the thing was about, and apparently bought 20 rolls of reel-to-reel tape, and they were going to go in and start tracking drums. And they did an A/B, and they tracked the drums to reel-to-reel tape, and they also tracked the drums to early digital, and immediately decided that they liked the digital that much better, and it was way superior, and there was nothing about the tape that they liked, and they just sent all of the tape back and then went onwards. And that is not the call that I would have made, I don't think, because these are folks that hear things very differently. And they're constructing sounds and making experiences that lend themselves to this digital sort of abstraction and indeed lossy compression. It's like they make things that will communicate in that way. Whereas there's other folks with extremely different attitudes. Neil Young is a classic example, but I've also been reading about Captain Beefheart's Magic Band, which wrote a bunch of the Beefheart music, just saying. And many of the choices there were leading to something that was a kind of organic expression. Like, one of the reasons Beefheart was an amazing vocalist was he was a very insecure dude. But because of that, he emoted very intensely and demanded that all the musicians emoted very intensely. And everything was about just communicating the feel of that, which is exactly what gets evaporated by the digital processing. So when I was mixing this album, I found that I was going entirely for, I made heavy use of the plugin Energy 2 because I was running at a high sample rate and I needed to do that. But I made heavy use of Energy 2 and heightening energy in that way, finding different sort of bands of livening sound up, but without going into a breaking things down into frequency ranges. Energy 2 has a opacity, like I can even demonstrate that a little bit. Like if I open up this drum track, and I open up Energy 2, so I've got this drum track, and you hear drum sounds happening. And that's dry. But if I was to add a big boost on that, it's a striking kind of mid-range, trebly, nasty boost that is not sitting at one particular frequency range. It's whatever I'm enhancing with that, it's kind of welding itself to the sound in a characteristic way. And then I can use the dry-wet to dial that effect back. And that's what I was doing with this album for a very large extent. I was using Chamber and Galactic for my reverbs, and I was using energy a great deal to heighten the detail of stuff. Anonymous, I probably have not updated Logic Pro to 10.7.0 yet, no. The computer that I'm running Logic on when I make videos on is still on macOS Mojave. I'm not sure I can update to 10.7.0. I would, of course, update it on the laptop that's the M1 laptop that I compile stuff there, but I'm not actually using Logic there, so it's a little bit complicated with all the different plugins and DAWs and things. Like, I'm running Bespoke on the main desktop, but I'm not sure I can run it on the little M1 laptop because I'm not sure it's compiling properly there. The UI may very well seem better. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not familiar with it. So yeah, what I'm thinking is today it might be a good idea to do YNotch, and we'll skip over to that. Just let me peek over here and make sure that I'm showing that properly. Yep. I'm sure I can't update it 10.7 on Mojave. So the desktop is going to have to stay the same for a little while. The desktop is currently heating up like mad. That's because it's really warm in this room. I have run the wood stove and it's not as bitterly cold as it has been for a while. So every winter what I end up doing is spending my entire winter just stoking the wood stove, and we'll see how that goes. As far as wavetable synths, I would probably do my wavetable synths in Surge, because Surge synths is the thing that I've been using for exploring stuff like that, and it's an open source project where I'm friends with the people who do it. So, although it turns out there's a slight bug in the implementation of Airwindows plugins, but it's not a super catastrophic bug, and they're going to fix it. Let's look at some of this rather than just talking about things. I feel as if that's not really interesting, and more will be revealed there, I guess. One of the things I'm looking to do after I'm completely finished mixing this album that I've been working on is I mean to get back into the music making, because I got some new ideas as to how I want to approach that. In a lot of ways, I feel like I've been approaching things all wrong, and I do feel that Bespoke is maybe a better instrument for me for doing the sorts of things that just seem more crisp from Airwindows. In particular, I don't tend to really like the results of just jamming stuff into Logic, and neither does anybody else. And in Bespoke, you kind of can't really do that, but what you can do is sample very freely and build things out of samples. That's fairly well established because Bespoke started off as something which was very sample-based. And what I do have is the studio where I can sample a bunch of things in with pretty decent, like I don't have to sample a DI guitar in, I can sample the proper output of an amp with my pedal board and so on going into it. Oh, if possible, how much do I charge for mixing, mastering an album? I would probably be doing the same thing that I did with the Bandwidth Siki, which is we're kind of constructing it as we go along, and so by the time I'm done, there's not a lot of point mastering it because it's kind of balanced, and I'm using the new metering that I invented to make sure that everything sits at about the right angle with the right amount of peak energy and so on. And there's not a lot of room to distort it or compress it or make it any louder, nor would you necessarily want to make it any quieter, nor would you want to fine detail EQ it, because that's not really the point. So it kind of ends up mastered once it's done being mixed. I'm kind of watching the meters to make sure I don't do anything that's too far out, and that does prove useful. And I have been charging $40 an hour. That was the last album, and that is this most recent album. I could probably do it over the internet, and it's just a question of how much bandwidth I have to do that. Like right now, I'm not taking on anything right away because I want to get into doing, my own music again and making something new and original so that I don't have to just keep relying on previous attempts of things. Yeah, it's like, we'll see. We'll see. You can always talk to me on Mondays when I'm doing the coding streams and ask me about that sort of thing. With Wojcicki, I've been working with Matt, and he's been coming in physically and being present for the session, but I have a commercial Zoom account, and so I do have the capacity, if I'm not mistaken, to do this work and also pipe the audio into Zoom so that, that depends. I'm probably not doing a song an hour unless they're very simplistic songs, so you never can tell. I wouldn't count on doing that like soon. That's not something that's going to happen right away, but wait until you see what the album coming out is, because maybe you'll hate it. I don't know. One thing I know about it is, guess who you are? I don't know. Thing is, I am finding a path where I am doing this mixing, mastering in such a way that it's proving to have distinctive results. That doesn't mean you'll like them. So basically, if you listen to the work I've been doing with Wojcicki, and I do hope to add some more, I hope to work for other people as well. But if you like the sound of those, you probably won't be able to get it from anybody else. It's unusual enough. My choices are unusual enough there that it's going to be kind of, if you want that sound, you probably, or I can tell you how to do it, but you'd probably have to go to me for that. If you hate that sound, there's anybody else that you could ask, and it's not really very difficult to get albums mixed in a very different way. I will point out that if you've learned how to track sounds correctly, you'll do better. Like Wojcicki's album was actually tracked to reel-to-reel tape. And then they bounced the tape to digital. They actually bounced it at 48K, and then I upsampled it to do the mixing. So that's something that Logic is actually quite good at doing. So it was not a trouble. And if you're not at that level, it's just a question of what kinds of sounds are you working with and what are you trying to do. And so Diego, I would tend to agree. And although for this entire album I was using the not yet released compressor Pressure 5, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Pressure 5 I'm using. I was using that, plus it has a AD Clip 2 on its output for sort of afterburner duties, kind of like NC-17 had afterburner. But it's all for the purpose of managing where the peaks go and constraining the very hottest peaks, but keeping that range of peak energy constantly active without just splatting it all into the distorty zone. So yeah, the stuff that I'm doing is coming across as quieter than hyper loud modern music, but oddly enough, not all that quieter than hyper loud modern music. And yeah, more will be revealed there. I'm doing my best with it. So for now, let's sit back a little bit and have a look at YNotch, because I'm going to walk through doing this. Also, the funny thing is I was scrambling to do the VST version of Y Bandpass last time. I did the AU of it, and then had so much going on the entire week, including 2 mixing sessions. Tuesday and Thursday I was mixing tracks, that I never actually got around to making the VSTs until Sunday, so I was making them that very afternoon. It's been a lot going on. So this is what we're going to be working with, and let's open up Bandpass as a reference point. And it appears that our version is going to be correct, because why not seems like, hey, why not? And we're going to be copying over some stuff from here. Yeah, YNotch. And this is a similar process to when we go and revise the Z-plane filters, which are, again, technically not Z-plane filters, but they're made to sound like a particular piece of hardware. How long would I spend at mixing one song? I know with the Wojcicki stuff has been maybe 10 or 11 tracks, because it's a classic rock style thing. It's the usual sequence of, a bunch of drum miking, fairly straightforward kick, snare. There's one overhead. He had 2 room mics. He had a rack and 4 tom mic. Often those were being used in an interesting and creative way, as far as framing the mix and getting something interesting out of it. And there's typically guitars, it's a vocal, a harmony vocal, things like banjos and stuff. And we would take between 2 to 3 hours to get a single song absolutely nailed. And then often we'd go away and come back, and there would be some notes, and he would want an adjustment to be made, and I would agree. And then we would just tweak a couple of things very slightly to lean it more in the direction of that adjustment. Because the thing about adjustments is that you don't want to go, oh, this is clearly wrong and needs to be different, and then you overcompensate and you make it the opposite. You want to avoid doing that. So we learned to do that pretty well. So it depends very much on how many tracks you've got. Like, I would guess about 6 tracks per hour on the whole, because we're talking like 12 tracks or so in total. Did not tend to go up to 16 tracks of things so much, and it was generally a single live capture, which is one of the good things about this band, is that there's that organic quality of stuff going. If you're bringing songs that are like, this is a modern mix, and this is a modern thing, and so therefore it has 65 tracks, well, we're going to be spending some time. The more that has to be done in mix, the more time it's going to take. And that also goes for stuff in mix that's getting done live or that's getting performed. On both of these albums, I have ended up running and I think in both cases it was just on a sort of reggae style track. This is the most recent one, very definitely so. But in both cases, I ran a delay live and played in like regeneration and pitch to do interesting things. And the first time it was with the Delta Labs Effectron, and it was an all analog mix with some different types of vintage digital space makers, like my MIDI Verb. And the Effectron is technically a Delta Sigma style digital echo. So it has very much its own tone and texture. And I played a track in. In this case, what I did was I was using tape delay too, because of course I have that now, and that did a really good job. And in so doing, on one of the tracks, it turned out that it would be good to have the regeneration crank up for some places and then not in others, and so I played that in with automation using one of the faders on my controller. And then I played in a pitch pass as well, and did that in one take because I did not want to take forever doing it. We had started late. We had started at 7 in the evening, and that appears to be a thing, I guess, working with this band. Is usually there's something where I'm playing the echo device, and it just worked. If I was to do lots of that across an album, it would take much more time. So it's very much a question of, like, could you afford to have me actively participating in your band and working in a creative way on the album and doing things like that at $40 an hour? Because I'm telling you, it'll add up if it's me doing that stuff for you. And I wouldn't be taking any royalty, and I wouldn't be taking a cut of the songs or anything like that. If it really brought anything to it, then, rock on, enjoy. But the more you do stuff like that, the more you're fiddling around in mix, the more time it's going to take. And I won't simply donate that time, because there's plenty of things like right now I should be doing YNotch or YNotch. So yeah, that is the thing. Expect like maybe 6 tracks in a song per hour. Best case scenario. Like if you've got all of your drum tracks or whatever, if you've got all these different synths and things like that, it's going to take some time to place them all correctly and deal with them. And so multiply that by the number of songs, and you're looking at how much it would cost to get somebody to do it. Failing that, take my advice and do the best with it yourself and see what we can get. There's also the possibility of doing that kind of stuff as live streams so that I can kind of share the experience with other people, and then people will hear your music, but they'll be able to like pirate it off of the stream if they wanted. And there will be no mystery, there will be no surprise to it by the time they get to it. But that is the sort of thing where that could compensate for needing to charge $40 an hour. Like if I was able to do a demo kind of thing and people got to watch the whole process go down, that could be interesting. Because I've not live streamed any of that yet. I have not live streamed mixing stuff for people. Speaking of live streams, since I am live streaming, let's continue doing YNotch. We'll start with taking these parameters and keeping them. And then we're going to take all of that and we're going to have that. Always fun. I suppose it'll be more interesting to do mixes and stuff, because if I get so heavily into like, here's this and it does that, at least with a mix you'll be able to hear what I'm doing. Whereas with this, we're kind of stuck doing plugins and coding, and when we lose language for that, it's not the most helpful. I think it probably is just kind of frustrating. There's not a lot I can do about it, though. Thing about an analog style compressor is that depends upon what you mean. Like, for instance, the Polyvox synthesizer, which is an old Russian synthesizer, one of the things that makes it be what it is it's heavily distorted. There's just a lot of distortion all in the middle of that, and it's like funky old germanium transistors or something, so it's also heavily slew limited or slew clipped. And for that reason, you get this gloriously big, dirty sound out of it. If there's a vintage Russian compressor of the same character, you'd probably it would be like a compressor that also had loads of distortion. And you could see what you got out of, like, when I put it out, pressure 5, with its output stage. I've been kind of separating things out into particular purposes. For instance, I don't necessarily build distortion and saturation stages into my compressors as much, because I generally like to have them sticking to the kind of thing that they do. But it is a possibility, and that's one of the ways you get to a sound like that. You get to a sound like, oh, amazing, colorful Russian compressor, by distorting stuff a lot. And then it's just the question of how well are you, like with pressure 5, I am doing the ultrasonic filtering in there, and that will help. It's where you place the ultrasonic filtering. When I get back into doing tape plugins again, one of the things that's going to happen is using the ultrasonic filtering and using it to throw presence peaks in there, which are more akin to what real tape does. And White Sea Studios did a nice example at one point of shooting out a bunch of tape plugins against real actual recording tape. And their setup for the actual recording tape was giving a lot of treble lift. It was giving a lot of sparkle and detail. And people forget this or avoid this because it's difficult to do sparkle and distorted detail in digital without just making a hash of it. We can but try, and I can make my best effort at not getting stuck in that one, at being able to do that type of stuff. And at least if you're doing 96K and up, being able to clean it up at the same time. It does get a little costly CPU-wise, though. But that's why I have a fairly beefy desktop. It's one of the reasons it's still in Mojave is it is not a new desktop. It's not like M1 or whatever. And I'm kind of sticking with a OS which was the best that they had back when they were doing these big Xeon chips with all these cores in them. And we'll see. So yeah, YNotch has literally nothing punched into it at all yet. So what we're going to do, I think, is straight up and I made it back in the day before I was doing this. See how that says Fabs input sample -37, and what we do now is -23 and then putting it in at -17. That is the new approach to denormalization, which is if there is any sound happening, then we don't throw denormalization noise in. But if there is no sound happening, we throw it in quite loud compared to what the real limits of floating point processing is. And that keeps it nice and clean and keeps stuff from going into denormalization. And what we're going to do is just grab this whole thing from here on down. And replace it, and we actually need to go and look at another file or another thing, such as maybe the regular biquad. Or biquad plus, which is biquad plus smoothing, if I remember correctly. Yep, because there we've got all this stuff in here. And this is very similar code. Yeah, bro, bear in mind that I have recently put out drum samples. So one thing that you can do on your own initiative is if you want to do drum samples replacement, download my most recent drum samples collection and you'll be able to draw from a bunch of stuff that I did in various ways. And the better luck, you'll be able to find something useful in there. I know that I've been doing a lot more electronic kicks lately. Like I needed to do drum samples that I would be able to use in Bespoke that would be like what my modular stuff does. And so I just recorded a bunch of stuff out of the modular and then sculpted and shaped the samples in such a way that they will be useful even in minimal techno things where the drum sound is really loud and there's nothing much else to get in the way or distract from it. Some of the sounds work better than others for that, but I am looking forward to it, and it might be a useful way of getting your stuff hopping a little bit more. Speaking of getting things hopping a little bit more, let's figure out what we're doing. So, with the bandpass filter, we have this parameter at 0, meaning that we simplify the kernel. That's not the case with the notch filter, so we need to put that back. So what we're going to do, first of all, is look into here. And this is the place where I need to bring something else in. So negative temp times biquad B1. So this is the part that we need to actually have in here and that we took out because it was the bandpass. There, that's the bit that we did not have before. And we're also going to grab this information here. And then we don't need biquad plus to be open anymore. Or indeed Y bandpass. So that's now been updated. The other bits didn't need to be changed. And what we've got up here is these things need to be uncommented, including this here, because we are in fact using that. Here's where we define the filter. So I'll make a little space here, and this is the notch style of it. So you know what? It looks very much like I can just drop that in. We'll trust it. Let's give it a shot. That should replace this stuff, and it's exactly formed the same. So this should now be the notch, and we can test it and find out. Bro 77 is 30 years younger. Who than me? That is possible. So this might be a short stream if I can get YNotch successfully done. And we got about 3 people here. It's nice hanging with you. If you have any questions, ask them quickly. But I could also, I don't know, go and take a nap and do my self-care kind of thing and so on, because I sort of have to bounce back from this massive album mixing thing that I've been doing and refocus on being able to do more for the channel and Airwindows and things, because while I've been doing this, Airwindows has been kind of slipping, and it's not in such a way that it endangers me, but it's become fairly clear, like, okay, the coding streams, there's a limited number of people hanging out for that, and plugins are going pretty much the same as ever, but it does become a question of like, well, what else can I do? And that's an interesting question. Ideally, again, one of the things I'm shooting for is I've got to find the things that basically delight me and have me be very interested. I was watching that video on Porcupine Tree and was struck, and in some ways this is just the sheer Britishness of those guys. They were very English. But the guys in Porcupine Tree seemed to hate everything that they did and everything everybody else did, and they just were very bitter and cynical and irony poisoned and very bored by everything. And I can't afford that attitude. I don't know what an ins account is, so tell me what that means. Meanwhile, let's test this out and see if we have a thing. Yep, and as usual, we got to do it twice. It's not finding the libraries first time around. See, it's compiling them now. So in theory, unless I miss my guess or unless I miss something, and there could still be adjustments to make here, but that should be a built plugin, and we will see. I stopped having an Instagram account. I choose not to have that, which is interesting. It's like, I wonder whether maybe I'm just withdrawing from the world and will not have any of those things, and will be a happier man making plugins on a little desert island somewhere or something, because there's a lot of pressure to dive deeper and deeper into social media and being a YouTuber and all of these things. I feel it is a trap, but at the same time, it can be a situation that compels you to play along. And one of my choices in that context is not to play along, to do what is actually right. And with a bit of luck, that means that the things I do will be healthier and better and vibe better than the stuff being churned out by lots of desperate people wired to social media. I don't know. I mean, it will, that, I'm reminded of like some of the BreadTube YouTubers that I like, where they have enormous popularity, but they're not actually doing things every 2 days. Some of them are barely doing a video every, few months. And they put a lot of more effort into things like, working stuff together in Final Cut. I have the capacity to learn that. That's something I could learn how to do. It's more of a question of, am I interested in doing that stuff and making more sporadic videos that are a little more of an experience. There's more to them rather than the very live streamy style that I have currently. And more will be revealed there too. I do wonder whether maybe as far as making, Ingle, where I'm at is actually YouTube, Gearspace, KVR, Dogs on Acid, and a sort of industry engineer place called ProSound Web. And anywhere else? I forget. There's other places I look at, but those are where I actually put up posts for things. And ProSound Web is weird because there is not that many people actively engaged, but they're all kind of like professional engineers that are 20 years older than me, you know. But at the same time, you post something there, and then for no reason it has like thousands of views, which I think are completely fake. I don't think there are people looking at my little product announcement in those numbers. It just doesn't make sense. But, you know, go figure. Any case, let's see what we've got as far as a, here, one of my little rock and roll tunes. Let's get this going and see what we get as far as Airwindows YNotch. So this should, in theory, be a notch. And if we make it less resonant, yeah, it sounds like a notch. Notching up the bass. That's notching out highs. And if I crank up the resonance a lot, yeah, that's a notch because you can barely hear it. And now let's start fooling with res edge. For instance, we'll take the resonance right down again. And then if we set the res edge, see you later, Bo. And again, this is smooth, so we can do this a bit. And then if we crank up res edge, what we get? We get kind of a lot of crackle. So notching out the highs, but also having lots of edge on that is giving us an interesting kind of snarl. Yeah, so you can use that on guitars maybe. And that's so full that I'm not sure that's very useful for YNotch. So let's try it on our drums again. Here's a drum recording. And more resonance is going to notch a tighter range out, so obviously you wouldn't want to crank the resonance up that much on that, but if we take it right down again, and it might be worth enhancing this a little bit, making it be broader. So I'm listening to the kick now. And handling it right, it does seem like I can put a lot of personality on this while sucking out the mid-range in this particular area. It gives us this tight little band. And a lot of edge on those hats, but then you'd probably be using this on an individual drum track, I think. And because it has the gain, you can distort it. Yeah, this might be worth dragging out that old Logic track one more time just because I have a solo bass drum track on there, which I don't have on this box, by the way. So this would probably work pretty well in a kick drum mic. You could shape the kick drum mic to do whatever you wanted. And we're getting a real aggressive dry crunch there. Let's fool with this just a little bit more because I see one thing that I could in fact do here. And that is go in here and look at my resonance. Because the other stuff always had the broadest resonance being like, so this is POW Prem 3, 2 times 15. So we're going from a resonance of a little bit over 0.5, which is not unusual for a low pass or high pass. It's not super broad. But if I take that down, I could go 0.0001 and it would still work. What that would give me is an ability to do incredibly broad notches rather than the fairly tight sculpted notches that these are. This is barely different from a Butterworth width notch. So what we'll do is, let's literally try that, seeing as this is from 0 to 0.5571, and the whole range of it goes from that to 15. Let's see what we get from a really, 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 really broad notch. Because we do have lots of gain on tap in case we take so much out, and it'll probably make it a little easier to adjust. Let's find out. And the way we're doing our sliders, it's not like we're really dialing in a specific Q factor by number. These are still designed so that you gotta listen. You got to know what you're doing and choose these things based on what they're doing to the sound. Let's go back in, see if everything still works. We've now changed that parameter very strongly. And that's a broad, broad notch. Here's what we had before. And we have such a broad notch now that you can't hear anything. You know, I think that's actually pretty workable. Like if we crank up incredibly high, we can set it up in such a way that the notch is so broad that it's just notching out everything, no matter how much distortion we have on. And that's interesting. Let's see if we can make it crash by moving the frequency. I'm going to say no, we can't. So this also gives us a tilt filter behavior where we can set it to high or low. And then use this to bring in more and more of the highs. Like this is now a tilt filter on the highs with res edge. The poor laptop is heating up like crazy. I am forcing it to do this at 96K. And of course, if we didn't have res edge, and we still have the gain, we still have the distortion. So big tilt filter here. Also a tilt filter here. Interesting. So now we've got it as a tilt filter, full crank, and bringing out only lows because we have a notch filter set at the extreme highs and as broad as we can possibly make it. As we increase res edge, we get a textural change in the lows. Like this is closest to standard biquad. And then as we start increasing it, the texture changes like this. So that's an interesting behavior. That's different. I wasn't expecting this, but I think it's workable. And then if we cranked it all the way up, we got a sort of sound effect going on. Yeah. And of course we can use dry wet to take that low frequency boosting we had going on and introduce some of this distorted, filtered notch, but it's a notch at the extreme highs, very broad. That's interesting in its own right. So yeah, these are interesting and perhaps useful things. And that's obnoxious sounding. Let's play dry wet with this. Little trashiness. So that's more your sort of wacky electro something or other. It's industrial noise. Still doing extreme settings here because we might as well find out what we have on tap. If I pull the gain back a little bit. And of course, Reg Edge is going to bring transient attack and snappier peaks to all of this to the extent that it is audible. I'll fire this back up again. And let's go full wet. If we dial back Res Edge and not try to be too industrial about things, that was a bad root drum part. I'm listening to the drums again, the kick again. You wouldn't necessarily want the cymbals to be in this. In fact, I could try to select out oh look, that's now got a ride cymbal on it. That's not what I wanted. The changes in kick drum are interesting. Because that's what I'm listening for. Yeah, that's a workable kick. And then widen the frequency out until there's nothing left. And now we have the attack on that kick. And a kind of neat snare sound in the background too. All right, so now I'm isolating a kick drum out of the overall room sound of the thing. And some tom sounds as well. Yeah, I think we got something useful, and the choice of taking the resonance all the way to next to nothing, which broadens the slope out enormously, I think that's a good call. That'll do. Yay, so we got there. So now I will let the laptop rest. And yeah, I think that'll do it for now. I will see whether I can't do any other kinds of streams or anything like that. It feels, maybe it's simply because I'm just not tagging things or whatever, but we will see how this stuff works for people. Probably what I'd like to do is hear some of your music, so direct me to that somewhere. If you're talking about actually having me mix stuff for you, that's the situation where I'd want to sort of hear what you had. And yeah, YNotch is, I think, indeed a sound design tool. And hey, Lorenzo, yeah, today I'm not actually staying late. Today we're basically done. But we've just done YNotch, and I think YNotch is going to be a very helpful tool going forwards. And having finished that, next up, not counting things like the new version of Pressure or the new version of monitoring, one thing we do have going on is the Z filters coming out. So that's going to be a thing. And by that I mean Z version 2 with the smoothing and the new approach to denormalizing. And yep, I'll see how that goes. You know, and one day I'll tell you all of the stuff that's been going on in this time period. I will say there's been a lot, so more will be revealed there. Let me turn down the gain of this thing. You don't send your music to me, but I don't know, tell me on Patreon or something as to where I should go to look. You've presumably got stuff up somewhere that's representative of the kind of thing that you're doing, so that would be what I'm interested in. And on that note, I'll talk to you folks later. It's been a series of long days, so I'm going to turn in a little extra early. And I'll have YNotch for you next Sunday. Laters. Bye-bye.